If ever you choose to look at research about why people divorce, and already you're thinking, wait a minute, he just said you're talking about parenting. You mentioned divorce. Just let me make my point. If ever you look at why people divorce, the reason they typically want out of a relationship, unless, of course, they're being lured by something else, but the reason they typically want out of a relationship is because they feel like they're not loved or liked or respected. It might be one of those, it might be two of those, it might be all three of those, but I don't want to be in this relationship because I don't feel like you love me, I don't feel like you like me, I don't feel like you respect me. Even in employment situations, part of that applies. Employees want to feel that you like me and that you respect me because that's just part of our human nature. We want that to exist, and when we feel in a relationship where that should happen, that it's not happening, we often don't want to stay in a relationship. It's like, let's go someplace else. Now, how in the world does that apply to parenting? Well, back in the beginning, in the Garden of Eden, God had made a prediction after humans had sinned that he was going to send someone to remedy that, and that, as we would know, would be Jesus, who came centuries later. And that she would be born of a woman. Actually, she's going to be born of a virgin woman, a very unique situation, obviously. And God had centuries to pick out which woman that would be. Think about what's she going to be like. You see, if we're going to be talking about parenting in terms of, well, let's parent like God does, I mean, there's great principles there, but I don't know about you, I don't quite compare to God. I mean, there's some days I think I do, but most of the time, I know that I can't be God. I can learn from him, but emulating him is very difficult. And so he picks out this woman, and her name is Mary, and you would think, well, then he would pick the perfect woman, except for the fact that other than God, there is no one who is perfect. Therefore, the woman he chose would have flaws, all people do. And so he picks this woman, lets her know she's going to have a child, and indeed she did. And then after the child was 40 days old, she and her husband Joseph decided to take the child, as they were doing to fulfill their religious custom, to the city of Jerusalem to make some sacrifices, a cleansing kind of thing, if you will. And when he's 40 days old, she hears something that most of us, maybe all of us, would never want to hear. We've been reading in the other services all of this text. I'm going to read part of it here. If you have a Bible, it's in Luke chapter 2, but I'm going to skip down and start reading at verse 33. In Luke chapter 2, beginning at verse 33. What happened was, when they got there was this guy named Simeon, and God had told Simeon that Simeon would not die until he saw the Messiah. The Messiah was coming, Simeon would see him. And when Joseph and Mary walk in with this little baby, Jesus, who is the Messiah, Simeon gets all excited because the Holy Spirit says, that's him, that's the baby, that's the one that you've been waiting for. And then he sings this song about how wonderful the Messiah will be. Now, verse 33 is just after he finishes that song. The child's father and mother marveled about what was said about him. By the way, I want you to see something here, if you will. We know that Mary was impregnated by the Holy Spirit, that she never knew a man in the sense of what we understand marriage to be like. We know, therefore, that this man Joseph was not the biological father of Jesus, because this child was formed of a miracle of God. And yet, interestingly, this text refers to him as the father. God never hesitates through his writers to call Joseph the father. Probably you've lived long enough to have seen that sometimes the father who is not, or even the mother who is not the biological father or biological mother, sometimes is more of a father or mother than those that are biologically related. Have you ever seen that? Joseph was the guy who, in every sense of the word, really was his father. I mean, he didn't procreate him, but he really was his father. He was the guy who taught this little boy how to do things little boys know how to do. Probably helped teach him how to walk. He put food in his belly, put clothes on his back. He taught him about how to interact with women. I take that back. He taught him how to try to interact with women. All those kinds of things, doing everything a father would do, and so we give respect to him. Oh, and not only should we respect Joseph, but Jesus respected Joseph. And so here they are, and this prophet, after he said all these wonderful things about Jesus, says something I would never want to hear. Verse 34, then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. Why would God give a prophecy like that? I mean, for those of us who have children, you remember that as soon as we had that little baby, maybe even during the pregnancy, we were thinking about things like, what will the future be like? What is he or she going to grow up to be? I mean, and once they start actually becoming alive, like when they get 2 or 3 and they can talk and walk, remember how excited you were thinking that they were going to talk? Remember how that changed after they started talking? And you're wondering, what's the future going to be for this kid? Is this child going to be the bank president or the bank robber? All these things we wonder about for our children, hoping for the best, thinking all these good things. And this mother heard something I wouldn't want to hear. Let me tell you about this boy. I just think about his praise, how God's going to use him. He's the Messiah, but people are going to talk bad about him. He said that. And it's not just going to be that they're going to talk bad about your boy, but you need to know that what's going to happen to this boy, is going to put a sword through your own soul. Man, I wouldn't want that prediction. There's enough to worry about already, enough things to fear, and yet he told her that. Why? I'm not God. I can't speak for God. I certainly can't explain God. My guess is because it was going to be so bad, she needed to be prepared for it, to think about it over the years. In this same chapter, it skips forward really fast. The next story there, it skips forward 12 years. Jesus is now 12 years old. In the meantime, Mary, we assume already in the meantime, Mary has already had some other children. You're going to read in the rest of the story of Jesus about his siblings, his brothers. Well, if he was born of a virgin, that makes him the oldest, right? And so he's going to have brothers. Unless he's at least 12 years older than the next one, then there's siblings born in the meantime. They don't really play into the next part of the story, the thing that happens when he's 12, but they will play into it a little bit later. So let's assume he's got some brothers by now. He's 12 years old. The family every year would go to Jerusalem for this big religious thing, and then they would go back home. And their custom was that the women would leave a day earlier. The women would take the children and leave, and a day later, the men would leave. You say, why did the women leave first? Because they had to stop at every restroom. So when the men finally left, they caught up like in an hour or something. And so Jesus was right at that age, 12, where he could be a man, he could be a boy, And so maybe he's with mama, maybe he's with dad. Dad assumes he's with mom, mom assumes he's with dad. You remember the story if you've read Luke chapter 2. They get all the way out there, and when they stop for that night, they start saying, well, where's Jesus? Well, I thought he was with you. I thought he was with you. Anybody ever lose a child even temporarily? Was it not total panic? I remember when our daughter Joanna was like 3. She had gone with me to the airport in Evansville, Indiana to pick somebody up. The place was packed, crowded, wall-to-wall people. I was holding her little hand, and I don't remember why I let it go. I did something. It took just a second. I reached back, and she was gone. And this place was so crowded, I couldn't find her, and I started screaming her name, pushing people out of my way, looking for my child. It took like 2 minutes to find her, which felt like 2 decades of total, pure panic. You say, well, weren't you embarrassed later? All those people heard you scream. Did not bother me one iota. Don't you feel bad for pushing them out of the way? No, they were in my way. I needed to get them out of my way. I needed to find that little girl. And only for 2 minutes I felt that. I can't imagine what it would be like to realize that nobody's seen him for a day. Really? I don't think they'd sleep much that night. You say, well, why didn't they go back in the dark? They couldn't travel in the dark like we do. That would have been a pretty dangerous thing, so they have to wait till the next day. And all night, my guess is if they slept at all, it was rather fitful. Oh, and how are they going to pray? God, you know that boy you gave us to take care of? We lost him. So in addition to the pain they feel as parents, they're also feeling this pain of God entrusted us with the Messiah, and we were rather careless. My guess is that Jesus had been responsible enough. As a matter of fact, you're going to see that as a boy, a 12-year-old boy, he's like, believe it or not, a 12-year-old boy. I think sometimes people think that Jesus thought he was God. I mean, you imagine Mary and Joseph knew they were about to have the Son of God, so they birthed that baby and stepped back to see what he's going to do, right? He's going to jump up and sing and dance because he's God, right? But he's a baby. They look at him, and what does he do? He burped and messed up his diaper, because that's what babies do. And now he's 12 years old, and he's still a 12-year-old boy. He is God, but he's being one of us in every sense of the word. You understand? He's having to learn like we do. There's all kinds of limitations he took on himself in coming into human flesh. And apparently he had been responsible enough, nobody felt like they had to check on him when they left. Now, son, you know, he's apparently a very responsible 12-year-old, so they just assume he knows he's going to be, and he isn't. So they get back to Jerusalem, a city that they only visit occasionally. So they don't know everything about the city. They're looking here, they're looking there, trying to find him, asking people, have you seen a boy? It looks like this. And then probably going back and checking some of the same places again that they thought he would have gone. And then another sleepless night. Where is he? Pure terror. 3 days. They find him. At the end of the third day, he's in the temple. He, the 12-year-old, is interacting with the religious scholars. He's asking them very deep questions, and they're responding with questions back to him that he's answering, and it's very impressive. Everybody, even his mother and father, when they got there and heard what was happening, everybody marveled at it. This is, wow. This is not just an average 12-year-old. And so when Mama speaks, what does she say? You made us worry about you. Because she's Mama, right? Back when I was in the Boy Scouts, back in the late 1800s, our troop once had to look for a 12-year-old that ran away. We found him. It didn't take all that long. And I'll never forget that when we brought him back to his mother, she did two things. One immediately after the other. The first thing she did was slap him. Then she hugged him. And I understood. I understood the emotion she was feeling. You idiot, come here. So she chastises him. She gets onto him. He said, but wait a minute. I thought Jesus was perfect. Jesus was sinless. He learned perfection. You'll read that later in the New Testament. He was sinless. You say, but what he just did was sin. I don't think so. Now, he definitely, in that sense, did not honor his mother and father, and that's a key commandment. But why wouldn't that be sin? I think it's because of the motive, what's happening behind it. You guys may have heard of Dr. James Dobson, used to be on Focus on the Family, written several parenting books, those kinds of things. Dr. Dobson points out the difference in dealing with a child who does something wrong out of being a kid and doing something wrong because of pure rebellion. Would you agree that those motivations change things? Because sometimes kids are just, well, let's use the biblical word, they're just idiots. That's what they are. You say, how dare you call my kid that? Well, it's because they're your child. That's why they're an idiot. We're all idiots. Don't you understand? We're all flawed. We all fail. What he didn't do because of rebellion. He got so intrigued in doing that he was caught up in it. I can see a 12-year-old doing that, can you? And not even thinking about how it's affecting mom and dad. Therefore, there's no indication that he was punished whatsoever. I think that makes sense. There's a good parenting principle. Don't punish what's not done rebelliously. Rebellion, you got to deal with. There's got to be consequences. You have to teach people not to rebel. But I don't think you punish people for their being imperfect or flawed. So no indication they punished him here. Oh, and interestingly, some people think that he put Joseph down in that passage because when she said, your father and I have been worried about you, he said, well, I was about my father's business. And some people would then say, oh, man, he slammed old Joseph, didn't he? No. He just understood what he was supposed to do. Because the very next verse says he went back home and he obeyed them. Not just Mary. The man Joseph, he deserves some credit. I'm quite convinced Jesus respected both of them, although in this case he didn't, but not rebelliously didn't, you see. Skip forward 18 more years. Now he's in his ministry. His mother and brothers actually were with him when he went to Jerusalem once, and you may remember if you've read your New Testament, about when Jesus got to the temple and the money changers and et cetera were there, and he took the whips and he ran those people out. Jesus' mother and brothers were there when that happened. Read the Gospels, you'll see that they saw that. Then they also saw him on that same trip work several miracles, like he was healing the sick and all that kind of stuff, all the miracles. They saw that. So she knew that he could do these things. So did the brothers know that he could do these things. But they didn't always respect it. And I think here's where we really get to the main point about parenting. that I want to make today. You understand, we could talk for a whole day in a seminar about parenting. You do understand that, right? We did order from Simon & Schuster one of my books called Fantastic Families, and meant to have them on that table out there for you, so you could get that today. It's based on research by Dr. Nick Stenay, University of Alabama, and Dr. John Dufresne. They did this study all around the world. I mean, literally all around the world. Fiji, Russia, every place. And found that strong families have 6 characteristics, and to the degree any of these 6 characteristics is missing, the family is proportionally weaker. They did a study for 25 years, and then I helped them write the book. I like that. They do the study for 25 years, I get my name on it. I like that a lot. That's a cool thing. Unfortunately, the books didn't arrive on time. But if you're interested in that, see that table out there? We can help you. We'll take your name and et cetera and help you get that. It's really good stuff. And I could be doing that kind of thing here. But I really don't want to do that in a sermon on a Sunday morning. I want to just make one really big thing. Now, a minor point I just made about punishment, whether it's rebellion or not, but the big one, the really big one that I hope we all remember, both parents and children, when we walk out of here. If you got a Bible, turn to Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3, I want to show you what I'm talking about. When Jesus started preaching, people reacted in various ways. For example, back in Luke chapter 4, in verse 22, it was talking about how all the people loved him and followed him and liked him. You skip down 6 more verses, just 6 verses, and get to verse 28, and they're already plotting to kill him. He said, happened that fast? Yeah, it did. Why? Well, what they really liked was when he worked the miracles, make the lame to walk, the blind to see, the deaf to hear. I mean, they loved that stuff. But he added his preaching to it. And some of the preaching people loved hearing, like, the meek shall inherit the earth. Wow, thank you, teach us more. But he was also pretty direct and straightforward, and sometimes he would look at people and say, but let me tell you what's really in your heart. You're hypocrites. You pretend to be religious, but in your heart you're really very selfish people. And because he told them the truth about themselves, and he didn't meet their theological orthodoxy. I mean, there were a lot of things he did that just really ticked them off, okay? And so they got angrier and angrier and angrier with him. And so the people became divided. The population became divided. Some people would say, he's of God. Look at these miracles. Other people would say, we can't deny the miracles, but it's not by God. He's doing these miracles by the power of Satan. He's evil. So some of the people were saying, he's of God. Look at the miracles. Other people were saying, he's of Satan. Look at the miracles. And when he would teach, some would say his teachings are hard, but he's right. Others would say he is a heretic. He's trying to lead us away from the traditions we've always had. And they got angrier and angrier. So some of the people that followed him left him, but other people flocked to him. I mean, he was one controversial character. You understand? Very controversial. And finally, here's what his family does. Mark chapter 3, beginning in verse 20. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. They flocked around him so much they couldn't even get to the kitchen. I mean, they couldn't get to the dining room. They couldn't get to anything. It's like we're so surrounded by people, and I'm assuming it's not just because they were physically unable to get to the food because of the crowd, but that people were wanting so much from them they didn't even have time to eat anyway. The next verse is the one. Have you ever had a verse sneak into your Bible? You know what I'm talking about? You're reading along and you went, when did that get there? I've never seen that before. It's like little Bible elves come in the night, add in passages. And I remember the first time I noticed this. I'd actually been a minister for years before I ever noticed this. I don't know how I missed it before, but I did. And I'm reading along. Look at this next verse. It's one of the most fascinating verses in the New Testament to me. It says, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. You ever remember reading that before? That Jesus' family says he's crazy? He's out of his mind. We got to go get him. We got to bring him home. Wow. Why would they do that? It's a little difficult to tell from the context. It could imply when they heard he's so busy he's not even stopping to eat. Maybe it was just that. He's out of his mind. And then he'll take charge of him. We need to make sure he comes home. We need to make sure he eats and takes care of himself. Maybe that. Or, again, in the context, it's a little hard to tell exactly what, or maybe it's because they heard that people said that he had a demon. Oh, he's out of his mind. Let's go get him. Or maybe it's because they are thinking about how many people hate him because of his preaching. Like, son, it's okay to do the miracles. It's okay to preach the good news, but you're just making enemies the way you do it. You're out of your mind. I mean, I don't know exactly why. Or maybe even a step beyond that. Not only are you preaching it harshly, but people want to kill you for it. You're out of your mind. And you know the family's going to hear whatever people are thinking, because there are going to be people, I think, throughout the history of the world, there always have been, there are now, and always will be as long as the world stands, people that will want to tell you every bad thing other people say about people you love. Bring all the rumors, the gossip, the innuendos. They want to make sure that you hear it, make sure that you know. So you know they're hearing all this stuff. Whatever the reason was, they finally decided that's it. He's obviously not taking care of himself. He's obviously not aware of what he's doing. He's out of his mind. We'll go take charge of him. What that means is we're going to get him and bring him home. Now, the question here is, when it says his family was going to do that, was that also Mary, the mother? Was it the brothers? Were they included? Or was it somebody else in the extended family? I'm thinking it's pretty clear that at least it was his physical brothers. Technically his half-brothers, you understand, because he was born of a virgin. And there's got to be something interesting going on, because we don't read about Joseph anymore. After Jesus is 12, Joseph leaves the picture. Now, it's assumed that Joseph died. So now here's Mary raising sons, which is tough for any family to raise kids, but imagine a single woman trying to raise sons, and some of these sons are very strong-willed. Oh, and these sons are not always happy with their older brother. Say, what? No, you say, you're just inferring that, right? Because that's how brothers act. Yeah, but more than that. I know they had trouble with him. First of all, well, let's just go back to the inference part. Anybody ever been compared to one of your siblings by your parents? Why can't you be like, imagine if it were Jesus. Why can't you be like him? Oh, good grief. How can I do that? But even beyond inferring that something like that, going a step beyond it to the fact that there's a story in John chapter 7 where Jesus, there was a big feast going on, and his brother said, why don't you go to the feast? And he wasn't ready. Now, the reason he didn't want to go to the feast was because he was ready to die. He knew he had to die. But it was very important that he not die until the right time and the right place. It was very crucial. People already hated him. People already talking about killing him. And his fear in this story in John 7 was if he went to this big feast, they'd kill him before it was the right time to kill him. So that's why he's holding off. So his brothers say to him, and you can go read it, the story's there. Well, people who want to be famous don't hide out. They go where the public is. So if you want to be famous, you need to go over there and work your miracles so those people can see it. It's pretty snide, actually. You say, yeah, how do you know? Oh, the next verse says, because his brothers did not believe in him. His brothers didn't believe that he was the Son of God. Oh, sure, we've heard Mom tell the stories about the angel. We've heard Mom say that he was born a very special way. And we have been there. We saw him cleanse that temple, idiot, because it made people mad. I'm talking about the way the others would think. And we've seen him work the miracles, and yet somehow it all gets mixed back up into, it's just because you want to be famous. We don't really believe in you. That hurts. A few years ago, for some unknown reason, Esquire magazine decided to take a shot at me. Esquire magazine, of all things, in an editorial. My picture's actually in it. An editorial about vampires. Yeah, I know, it makes no sense at all. They take a shot at me in an editorial about vampires. My younger brother called me and said, hey, did you know you were in Esquire magazine? I don't read Esquire magazine. He said, I thought you'd have had 10 copies by now. He was being snide. You know, he knew I'd been on Good Morning America and Today's Show. He knew I'd been in People magazine, Better Homes and Garden, Women's. I mean, he knew I'd been in a lot of magazines and a lot of national television shows. But his implication to me was, you do all that because you want to be famous. That hurt. You think I'm really doing this because I want to be famous? You don't understand the work that I do and how much pain we have to deal with every day in people's lives, because when you help people who are in distress, you can't help but take some of that pain on. Yeah, sometimes it attracts national attention. Sometimes you wind up in the magazines, but you don't do this to be famous. You understand? Oh, and beyond that, don't you know that the more famous you become in serving God, the more attacked you get by all kinds of people who will hate you for it? Now, I know my brother loves me. I think most days he likes me. And we worked that out. It didn't take long. We worked it out. But I had to let him know, I don't feel like you respect me. We want all three. We do. Give me all three. Don't just love me. I want you to love me. I want you to like me. But I want you to respect me. Even though I'm flawed and imperfect. And Jesus' brothers didn't. By the very fact they came to get him, showed disrespect. And now Mama comes with them. I don't know if she was in on it from the beginning, or she just went along with them, or they finally convinced her. All I know is she came as well. Well, they can't get in the house. I mean, Jesus can't even get to the food. You understand that not anybody getting into this house. She says, go tell him his mom's out here and his brothers. He demonstrated great respect for her. Stories we skipped over, don't have time for. He had demonstrated great respect for her. I'm assuming she would figure that just by knowing she's outside, he'd have enough respect to get up and come out there. But he doesn't. Actually, he says something that I'm sure was extremely painful for her to hear. My mother? My brothers? These are my mother and brothers. In other words, the people he had come to take care of, the people he had come to save. He said, then, how was that not disrespectful to her? Oh, there's disrespect here, but it's not him toward her, it's her toward him. Because she's actually trying to stop him from doing the very mission he has. He's nicer in what he says here than what he said to Peter when Peter tried to stop him. Remember that? When Peter tried to stop him, he said, get behind me, Satan. He didn't call his mama that. But I think here's the lesson, the whole lesson for today. If we as the people of God raise our sons and our daughters to serve God, then sometimes God's going to call them into situations where people are going to talk bad about them. Sometimes God's going to call them into situations where they can get hurt. And at least my inclination is to go rescue them. Our daughter Kimberly, who's sitting right back there, is our youngest daughter. When she was a freshman in college at Lipscomb University, she found out that Lipscomb had stopped doing mission work in India, and she thought that should happen. So she put together a group to go spend a month way out in the bunkers there, somewhere in India at an orphanage, taking care of orphan kids and doing stuff like that. And I remember, and Alice and I talked about it behind closed doors, I remember thinking, we don't want you to do that. First of all, you're 18 years old. What do you know about a third world country? I mean, we're not wealthy, but by India standards, you're filthy rich. And now you're going to go to a place where we don't know what kind of medical care, if any, exists. We don't know what kind of police force, if any, exists. Or there's all kinds of germs. If you get a scratch, you've got to wonder what's getting in there and what's going to do to you. Where you got to wonder, what about everything I put into my mouth? Of the kind of country, because you've been in the back part of a third world country, one of my physician friends once told me, if you're there and you get hurt and need blood, don't take it. Bleeding to death is going to be a far better way to go than the disease you're going to die of if you get that blood. And our baby girl wants to go. We don't want her to. But all their lives, all my daughter's lives, we've taught them, you do the right thing. You do the right thing. And so may God be with you. One of my buddies came. He said, my daughter wants to go with your daughter. I said, okay. He said, I don't want her to go. I understand. He said, put my foot down. You can't go. And she looked me in the eye and said, you don't have that control over me anymore. I'm a freshman in college. I'm legal. You can cut off my financial support. You can cut off your emotional support, but you can't control me anymore, and I'm going. He said, what do I do about that rebellion? What do I do about her being so rebellious against me? And I said, I think the disrespect's coming from your side. Didn't you train her up to walk in the path of God? Yeah, but not this path. God doesn't take orders. He'll take requests, but he doesn't take orders. And if this is what she feels God calls her to do, you see, they're going to go. And if God forbid something terrible happens to them over there, the difference in my daughter and yours, my daughter will know her parents love her, support her, are behind her. Your daughter's last thought will be that you're angry with her. So what's the lesson for Mary? She blew it right here. She really did, because she's human. Thank you, God, for giving a human mama. We can look at that and go, wow, even the people you handpick sometimes mess it up. But she stayed with him. She did. So that later, when the worst came to worst, and he was hanging on a cross, and he was dying that painful death, she was standing right there watching it. He still loved and respected her. One of the last things he did was make sure she was taken care of. Take care of my mama. And so for 3 days, she missed him again, but God had already trained her for that, missing him for 3 days. And then he resurrected. And in Acts 1:14, after he ascended, it says all the disciples were together praying, including Mary and Jesus' brothers. Mary became a Christian. Jesus' brothers became Christians. One of them, James, wound up writing one of the books of the New Testament, the book of James. Isn't that amazing? So what's the lesson here, my friends? If we teach our children to follow the will and heart of God, then we can't supersede that. A sword may pierce our soul, but it won't break our heart, because we know the resurrection comes.